So we're going to look at Psalm 91 because, of course, in a very kind of real sense. Now, look, now, hang on, let's get this here. In a very real sense, we have to think about Psalm 91 because it's quoted in the context of Jesus in the wilderness. When I say we have to, it makes it sound like a chore, doesn't it? But the fact that the devil quotes it at Jesus, and that's why I've decided to use this psalm tonight in what we're thinking about as the formative prophecies, because we've gone through psalms, we've looked at the predictive ones, and we've looked at the ecstatic ones. We were looking at Psalm 22 last month, and so this time I wanted to look at the psalms that in some way form or shape or inform Jesus and help him kind of make decisions or make choices as he develops his ministry. And so right at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, obviously, Psalm 91 kind of comes into the picture because the devil quotes it back at him, and he says, because he'll put his angels in charge of you, they'll guard you in all your ways, they'll bear you up in their hands so you won't dash your feet against a stone. I've actually put a couple of times, I've got a couple of kind of the references here from Luke and from Matthew. Oops, sorry, I'm assuming my face isn't kind of growing and shrinking too much. I've just got it out of the way now so I can see things. So I've got the Matthew quote, we've got the Luke quote, and it finishes with that, lest you dash your foot against a stone. And the challenge obviously to Jesus is to make a big scene at the temple, to go up to the temple pinnacle, to jump off the temple pinnacle. The angels won't let him dash his foot, and it will prove to everybody that he really is the Messiah. And so that's the kind of the context that this psalm sits. And so I thought, rather than jumping straight into that kind of understanding perhaps what it means to Jesus there, I thought we'd still start at the beginning, but remembering where we're about to kind of get to, where we're heading to, and we'll see how the psalm kind of unfolds, because there is therefore kind of a real sense in which this psalm must have kind of lived with Jesus through the rest of his ministry, because it becomes this kind of key moment of spiritual warfare. And so it kind of shapes him and it informs him. So if we go right back to the beginning of the psalm, we start with verse 1. So it kind of addresses in the Hebrew, it doesn't say a Psalm of David, but we've got that from the Septuagint and so on. So we put that into the English translations. But it just starts off with, "He who rests in the secret place of the Most High." And I've highlighted those words, rests and secret place, because you're going to see it is a theme that does get picked up by Jesus. "Of the Most High shall stay permanently in the shadow of," and I've then put overwhelming support. Most translations have the word kind of Almighty there. We're going to come back to that in a second. But this idea of the one who rests in the secret place of the Most High will stay permanently in the shadow of, and I've put here, overwhelming support. It kind of reminds you, if you go back to the Exodus, when the children of Israel are coming out of Egypt, and we're told in that context that Moses used to go in and out of the presence of the Lord in the tabernacle, and then it has a little kind of throwaway line. It said, "But Joshua," which of course is the name that becomes Yeshua, which is Jesus, so stands as a type of Jesus. Joshua, who's a type of Jesus, remained in the presence of the Lord. And that kind of that's almost that thing we've got there, the staying permanently in the shadow, and here I've translated it as overwhelming support. And so I put in the slide that you're looking at, where Jesus says his use of resting place, which in the Greek, obviously because we have it translated from Aramaic into Greek and then into English, the Greek word that we find used a lot in Jesus' mouth is the little word meno, which means, and we're going to look in a minute, but basically means the same as to rest or to remain. And there's also the idea of the secret place comes into Jesus' teaching, which is the Tameion, which is the Greek word for it. So the resting place word, do you know, this is really annoying. I've just had a look. I did rest in red, and I did secret place. Oh no, it is correct. It is correct. Abide is rest. Forget everything I just said. So you can see in the next line, the abide in me. That little word abide is the Greek word meno. Abide in me, and I in you, and the branch can't bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine. So neither can you unless you abide in me. And actually, there's a whole few chapters in John's Gospel. It runs from about chapter 12 through to the end of chapter 15, and even maybe into 16, where the word abide or meno is constantly being used. And so it's a key idea in Jesus' teaching. And John, in his Gospel, records it. Then his letters, he also uses the word quite a lot. Remaining in the Lord, resting in the Lord, abiding in the Lord. And the idea of the secret place comes into Jesus' teaching. I've quoted it there in Matthew 6. When you pray, you enter into the private room. You're going to shut your door and pray to the Father who's in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. And so we've got the phrase private room and the secret place there, kind of capturing this idea of the secret place. I've kind of put into the PowerPoint presentation, which I think you should be able to download because I've uploaded it. So if you're here on the live session, you should be able to kind of fiddle around in the background while I'm talking if you want to get hold of the PowerPoint presentation. The Hebrew here for rest is yashab, and this is just taken directly. The only thing I've done to this, the only change I've made, is I've highlighted a few of the words in red. But this is taken directly from my electronic version of Strong's Concordance. So yashab, which technically means kind of to sit down or to sit in ambush, which is kind of sit quietly. See, so it's peacefully, quietly. It means to dwell or to remain. It actually can also mean to settle, because it's waiting with quietness. And even to marry, which is quite nice, settle down and to be married. And just very helpfully, I didn't choose it, this is just copied straight from Young's Concordance, but it also means to excrete bodily waste, i.e. you sit quietly on the toilet, I guess is what it's driving at. And you see the different words that the King James Version translates it with, and you see it there is abiding, which we've already seen is the word meno, abiding. Dwelling, which is also a translation of the word meno. It's to sit down, to be still, to remain, to settle, to tarry, all of these kinds of ideas. And so there's a very kind of key tie-in with that Greek word meno, which means to remain, to abide, to wait, to abide, dwell, tarry, etc., etc. So you get the kind of sense that there's a very kind of strong tie-in between the two. And then we go to the secret word. The Hebrew word Cether, or Kethra, which if it's used once in the feminine in the Old Testament in Deuteronomy, actually just kind of means to hide or to cover. So King James does at one occasion translate it as backbiting, because they're kind of hidden words, nasty words that have been hidden. But otherwise it's more regularly, it's covert, covering, privily, i.e. that's the old way of saying privately, or secretly, or even secret place. And then you compare that with Tameion, which again I've just taken this directly from Strong's. It's not the kind of language I use. A dispensary or magazine. I know that magazine has other meanings, but I can't get my head around anything other than hello. So, but it's the IE you can see. It's a chamber or the interior of an oriental house, generally used for storage or privacy. And it's sometimes the King James has translated it as your secret chamber or the closet. It's the quiet place. And so you got the same kind of juxtaposition of ideas. So you go back, he who rests, and that's an idea of Jesus's. Who is it who's resting in the secret place, and then of the Most High? And the Hebrew for Most High, which I haven't done the slides on, but I'll just kind of address them, I suppose. The Hebrew for the phrase the Most High it's kind of turned the thing into a name, which is why we've done it that way, but it doesn't have to mean, because it's they're resting in the very highest of heavenly places, if I can put it that way. The one who takes time, who tarries, who remains in the secret place, i.e. the inner life place, at the highest point, shall stay permanently in the shadow. In other words, there's a point where we are deliberate, and we just take some moments there, we get there, and we're in that place, and then something of the benefit, because now we're permanently in the shadow of the overwhelming support, which is the way I've translated the little word Shaddai there. That word is made up of just 3 Hebrew letters. Most translations you'll see it translates it with the word Almighty. The net version says Mighty King. Young's literal doesn't say anything else, just says mighty, just mighty. I quite like, though, you'll see the Western Leningrad Codex, which is what WLC stands for, which is an interlinear based on the Leningrad Codex. In the kind of where it does the literal thing for each Hebrew word, it translates that little phrase Shaddai as who suffices, the one who suffices. So he who rests in the secret place of the Most High shall stay permanently in the shadow of the one who suffices, the one who's sufficient, the one who's able or capable, perhaps their way of translating it. And the Septuagint translates it uniquely here as the God of Heaven. I say uniquely because the Septuagint doesn't normally translate Shaddai as God of Heaven. It normally goes with Almighty as well. But I'm just giving you a kind of a rough kind of feel there. And if you read right the way through to the bottom of your notes, I put some notes on the word. Because it's kind of interesting, because what's important is, you see, is that Shaddai bit there is actually part of the name of God, El Shaddai. And so it's an important word to take a little bit of time of understanding. And we're doing a lot on the first verse, but you'll see in a minute how the whole thing sets up what we're going to see as a kind of the flow of events that starts with Jesus' baptism and through the temptation. And so the word or the name, El Shaddai or Shaddai, just without the L, has several possible meanings. If you go and look it up, you can kind of go, well, look in things like your Strong's Concordance and so on. Strong's is older, of course, and there's been more work done on some of these things. So Shaddai, very regularly, you can see. Oh, Sarah's asking where I get the PowerPoint. I've shared it, Sarah. So you have to kind of dig around. That might be one of the things you can and can't do. So it's if you kind of have a look. I don't know if someone else wants to, while I'm talking. You can, if anyone who knows how to do it, you can message Sarah and tell her how to get the PowerPoint. But the Shaddai, as I said, it can come from the Akkadian word. Akkadian is the oldest kind of Hebrewish or Semitic language. It's very close to Hebrew in its words, and it has the word Shadu, which is a mountain. So there's a kind of a sense in which it could be a reference to the mountain. And the reason why sometimes people aren't so keen on that is it's often presented by scholarship as kind of being a mountain god. It's the name of a mountain god, and they say, well, we don't like that idea because it seems to be the Jewish god of gods, not some mountain god. There's a similar argument, it's not as good, but for a word that means plain, so god of the plain as well in an Arabic language, but I can't remember much about it. But you get those kind of ideas, that mountain god, Shadu. Or it could be derived, which is the usual way, and is often the way, if you go straight into Strong's, you'll see it described. But I think it's often misleading at best. It's not wrong, it's just misleading. Is they take the Hebrew word shad, and I've done it with a double daleth there, so shin daleth daleth. But the way when Hebrew is really being written, sometimes that second daleth gets lost. But that's the full form of the word, shin daleth daleth. Which means kind of a destroyer, but even the word destroyer, you see, is the way it's translated. It's not really. It's more to do with strength. It's kind of it then kind of becomes destroyer, if I can put it that way. So it's destroyer, but it's about strength, but it has a negative connotation for the person who's overwhelmed or is taken over and destroyed. I just use the word overwhelmed, so you see where we're going in a sec. More interestingly, because I think it's not that, again, that we should finally settle on this word, but I think it starts to push us towards the root of the understanding of this name, El Shaddai, Shaddai, and in this context. It actually is the word also for breast, for a female breast. And actually, if you kind of get any kind of concordance or whatever, and you look at the root word, because every Hebrew word, you have a kind of a parent root, and then you have adopted roots, which kind of are like extensions of the family. So you go right back to the core root, the shud bit. It's to do with swelling or expanding. And of course, it's kind of it's tricky in a kind of context like this to kind of not try and speak inappropriately. But the idea, obviously, with as a girl reaches maturity, the breast expands and it swells, and but the funny thing is, it's that swelling bit, the expanding, which is probably it's the strength that is expanding that leads us to the shad bit, which is the destroy, because it's not so much that it destroys, it's more it overwhelms. So if a nation is expanding its territory, it is overtaking, overwhelming, taking over, destroying. You get the kind of the feel. So it's all there in that root of expanding. Interesting little touch is that in the Babylonian Talmud, it takes a kind of a totally different way, which is where they get that nice little phrase that the one who suffices, to do with El Shaddai. And it relates the name and making the S a kind of a prefix that makes it the one who, and then the D bit is the word for is enough, or is it? So it's the one who is enough, the one who is sufficient, or the one who suffices, the one who is enough. And they say the reason it means that is because in creation God would speak and then he would have to say it's enough. So it's enough is kind of, he decides the limits. So the sea is kind of expanding and now it's enough. And so now we expand the land and the land is expanding, it's enough. So he kind of speaks, it grows, and then he says it's enough. So they say the Shaddai bit here is reference to God in the sense of it's who is enough. It's a little bit, it doesn't quite work with the grammar of the Hebrew, but it's a nice imagery, and it's important to notice it's an old understanding of it. And the funny thing is, though, you can actually kind of wind all of these things kind of together and kind of get an image growing. I want to go, before we do, I've got there at the bottom, you can read it, there's a connection between these words, so I'll just talk through. That shad word, you see, the reason I think it's very, very important to see the nurture word, or the fruitfulness element, because I don't have slides for all these things. I have to do these things from memory sometimes. There's another word in that family root about shad, the expanding bit, which is also the waist, which of course in pregnancy also expands, you see. So it's just, you get where I'm driving it. So it means to expand, and the word that is used to expand is the same word that can be used for the waist, because the waistline. Mine expands, totally different reason, but that's that's something we don't want to kind of talk about in these kind of in these sessions. But the idea of succor and nurture that go with the breast is incredibly key in all of the Bible's earliest uses of the name Shaddai. As you get to the latter kind of part, the word is actually used 48 times of God. 7 of them is El Shaddai, and the other times it's just Shaddai. So, but those 48 times, if you go to the earliest kind of usage of them, you always find them in the context where God is promising fruitfulness, multiplication, expansion. So in Genesis 7, 1-2, I am El Shaddai here. I am the God of expansion, or of the breast. And therefore I will multiply you exceedingly. So it could be breast, or it could even be a pregnant stomach kind of expanding. You see, the Hebrew loves wordplay. It's not that it's saying that, but it's that would be there if you understood the kind of the ancient Hebrew kind of instinctively. You would get that kind of sense. So I'm El Shaddai, the expanding waist, the expanding breast, and I'm going to expand you. I'm going to increase you, multiply you. Genesis 28. And El Shaddai bless you and make you fruitful and multiply, and you and your offspring. So again, this idea of nurture and expansion is all going in there. And God said to him, I am El Shaddai, so be fruitful and multiply. You've got it again. A nation shall come, and a company of nations will come from you, which again is the idea of expanding. You see how all the things are coming together? Or by Shaddai, who will bless you, and the blessings of heaven be upon you, and upon the deep that lies below. The deep blesses on the breasts and of the womb. And that little phrase, blesses of the deep that lies below, remember, it's from the deep that everything living kind of came, when God creates the heavens and the earth, and the spirit hovers over the deep, and it's out of that, you see, that new life comes. So you get that kind of sense in which Shaddai, if we kind of translate it, which is the usual way, as destroyer, therefore almighty, it's not that it's wrong, it's just somehow it doesn't capture that fullness of what the name is driving at, and which is much more about protection, nurture, care, to the point of growth and expansion, just like a mother suckling at the breast, or a mother being pregnant giving birth to a child. You see all of those kind of ideas which are there in the Hebrew word, so we don't even have to go to mountain. It's just interesting that I remember when I was 17, travelling with my father in the States, and we went camping in the Grand Tetons mountain range, and it turns out that Tetons actually is the Indian word for breast. And as we were kind of talking around, someone actually said, you know, loads and loads of languages have a mountain or a mountain range, which is just called the breast as well. So it's interesting that even maybe that Akkadian word for Shadu being a mountain is perhaps tied to the same kind of idea of nurture and family and expansion and so on. So that's why, sorry, that was a very long-winded way on one word. I kind of put in the translation we did. So I've gone, oh no, hang on. Oh yeah, the mix of ideas. There you go. Resting, abiding, and oh yeah. Okay, I'm moving on to another. But that's why I kind of started that thing. He who rests in the secret place of the Most High shall stay permanently in the shadow of overwhelming support. That's perhaps it may not be the nicest way of saying it, but it's trying to capture all these things. You see, it can overwhelm you, which is why it destroys you, but it's overwhelming support because actually it's care and nurture, and it's going to grow you, make you bigger. You get the feel. So we'll move on. After one verse, we've got, how many verses are we? I think we're 16 verses, aren't we? Yep, 16 verses. We're going to take a bit of time. No, we're going to move faster. That was a lot there to set up the understanding of how this psalm comes to play in the run of things which lead Jesus into the wilderness. Because the mix of ideas I put: resting, abiding in a spiritual secret place, leading to fruitfulness, the blessings of an idea taught by Jesus. We find those ideas are taught by Jesus and also other New Testament writers. So just kind of getting that. So if you rest in Him, you take time in Him, in that kind of high place, the inner place, the secret place. Actually, it's what we do is active in that, but we discover ourselves now in a more passive sense. We are under the shadow, the overshadowing of His overwhelming support. So here I go. Now, interestingly, as I say, all of these ideas come together at the time of Jesus' baptism, because Jesus, when he was baptized, this is now Matthew 3:16, when he was baptized, went up directly from the water, and behold, the heavens were opened to him. So the heavens are now this open to him, and the way in which the Greek is written, in other words, it's not that they kind of, whoop, there they are, open, now they're closed again. It's that they were open to him in a sort of a new sense of permanence. So Jesus is coming up out of the water, and he has an experience which leaves the heavens permanently open to him. Just as this drove at, if you rest in, then you will you'll be permanently in the shadow of the overwhelming support. There's this kind of sense of the overwhelming support that now is on Jesus as he comes up out of the water, and as he's there, of course, the Holy Spirit comes down on him, and we're going to think about that in a minute. But I think I've got to go through some other verses first. So he says, "I will say of Yahweh, my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust, because He will deliver you from the snare of the trickster, and from from malignant contagion." This is a little bit of a sidetrack, so I want to come back to this flow with Jesus. Jesus has come up out of the water. The heavens are now permanently open to him. He's being overshadowed by overwhelming support. In that context, there's this kind of promise that God will be his refuge and my fortress, and this is the bit that's going to be tested. It's going to be tempted. It's going to be attacked by the accusation of the devil in a short while, because God is his refuge, my fortress. He will deliver from the snare of the trickster. I prefer that. A lot of translations will put the trapper, but it's someone who's kind of setting tricks and traps. And from the malignant contagion, that kind of thing that's almost invisible, but somehow it gets to you. And I've got some notes, and you've got them in your notes, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I don't need to. I want to keep the flow on this, on Jesus. And he will cover you with his feathers, and this is what I'm saying, you see. He will cover you with his feathers. Well, you'll be in the shadow of the Almighty. He'll cover you with his feathers. Under his wings he'll take refuge. And as Jesus comes up out of the water, the Holy Spirit comes down on him in the form of a dove. And so Jesus is genuinely, really quite literally, physically, my understanding is that it's not a sort of spiritual vision of a dove. It probably is a real dove. Other people just thought that's a bit interesting. There's a bird landing on him. But actually Jesus understands as he comes up out of the water, and the heavens are open to him. He is now permanently in the place of the overshadowing sufficient supply of El Shaddai, and now the dove comes down and covers him with his feathers, and he is under his wings. This is as he takes refuge in God, and his faithfulness is your protective hedge and a guard around you. And it's all part of the promise as Jesus is coming up out of the water. Heavens open, dove comes down, he's covered by the pinions, I think it's one translation, or the wings of the dove. And so that kind of verse suddenly ties the whole of this psalm and Jesus' baptism experience together. So what's being driven at here is this place of you rest in me in a way that kind of leads, you rest in the secret place. You've got that inner secret life, which we see in Jesus. He gets up early in the morning. He has that place. He teaches his disciples to have it. And you'll be permanently now in the overshadowing of his sufficiency, and you'll understand that he has covered you with his feathers, and with his wings, under his wings you take refuge, and all of these things are kind of drawing together. This is why I call it formative. It's kind of shaping Jesus' understanding his courage and his calling as he steps into these things. And you won't be afraid of the terror by night, nor the arrow that flies during the day. So both things. Nor of the contagion that spreads invisibly, nor of the assault that lays waste in the daylight. 1,000 may fall at your side, and 10,000 on your right hand, but it will not come near you. Funny thing is, sorry, this is a little confession from my point of view. After I had my I had my lymphoma when I was 15, and I got healed. I've got this Bible here, which was I got sent a financial gift from someone who said, I felt that Lord, it was £20, just so you know. And this actually I think was 24, so I had to borrow £4. He said, I don't know what for, but I felt like God told me to send you this money. So I thought I'm going to buy myself a Bible, because I was very enthusiastic for the Lord, having just been healed. And so of course I was really keen to kind of start writing in it, which means that not everything I wrote in it was of the best quality. But this is actually one of the first verses I ever put a note by. And just to tell you the story, is there had been some article on TV, you know, because this was back in the early to mid 80s, and everyone was kind of very scared of the Cold War back then. There were things like play for the day is when the bomb drops, you know, all that kind of thing. So I just watched the thing on that, and I came across this verse. It says 1,000 may fall and 10,000 on your right, and so I put, if I'm a Christian, I might survive a nuclear explosion. And I look back at it sometimes, and I look at it and I think, now, am I embarrassed by that or not? Because it's kind of like, it's not the most erudite comment. and I think to myself, now, am I so clever that I don't believe it anymore? But there's that kind of sense in which it kind of highlights the fact that this psalm is actually about God's overarching protection that comes out of the one who's in that place, in that intimate relationship that has actually, it's opened something up that's kind of more permanent. It all is part of the flow of it. So that's my confession. That was my earliest kind of comments in my study Bible. Though your eyes, that's the way it finishes, though your eyes will look and see the recompense of the wicked. In other words, you've got all of this sense of the Lord's protection all around you, but you are going to look around and see the wicked kind of getting rewards they shouldn't get. It's kind of the drive of it here. So there's a promised protection, even when it looks like the wicked have got their rewards, the way it's kind of going through. For he will put his angels, and now we come to it, you see, he will put his angels in charge of you, to guard you in all your ways, and they'll bear you up in their hands, so you won't dash your foot against a stone. I've got the verse which we've already put there from Matthew. And I always remember, this is Sarah, I think the very first one we ever did, Sarah, you asked the question at the end, which shows your great erudite wisdom in these things, where you said, and so how's that applicable? and I think actually this is very applicable, because I found it I remember being challenged once by the Lord, because it was actually to do with the way I use my finances. And because the logic was, after I felt I wanted to go into ministry, I never really thought about money, which sounds very spiritual, but actually is not necessarily, if I can put it that way. Because very often, other people have to sort it out for you. So I did loads of, I got the worst mortgage rate ever, because I just didn't care about I didn't want to be one of those people that was getting fiddly with money. And I felt, because the Lord will look after me, the Lord will do it, the Lord will do it. And I suddenly remembered, I came to this point, and I thought, actually, there's a challenge here, because Jesus has this incredible promise, and what the devil does is he says, so presume on it. Take it for granted. Do you get the thing? And it's interesting, because you do meet people, and they're really frustrated, because they say, the Lord called me 15 years ago and said I was going on the mission field. I can't do it. My work is complicated. And so what did you do about it? Well, I didn't do anything about it, because he said he would do it. He's just not done it. And there is this kind of interesting sort of symbiotic relationship that we have, even with the promises God gives to us. There's a kind of a conditionality about all prophecy, and even this sense of protection, which we don't therefore just presume on. It's something to lean on when we need to. but it is not something to kind of use as leverage to get what we want, if I can put it that way. And that seems to be at the heart of the challenge that the devil is putting to Jesus, which is, so this is the application here for you, Sarah, is it doesn't deny the fact that this is a promise. This is a promise to prove. That's why I call it that. It's a promise, and we're going to see that can be tested when it needs to be, but we don't just kind of like, let's see if it works, if you see what I mean. Let's have a go and make it trivial. And Jesus kind of responds in that way. He doesn't pick up and do what the devil asks, obviously, as we know. He quotes back, obviously, about not putting the Lord your God to the test, which comes from Deuteronomy, like all of the answers he gives to the devil at this point. It's just interesting to notice at this point how, in this temptation period, there are three characters in Scripture that are anointed, and Jesus, as the anointed, as the Messiah, represents all three. He's the prophet, he's the priest, and he's the king. And it's interesting, the temptations are produce bread in the wilderness, like Moses, the prophet, or go to the temple, be a priest, or be a king, rule the nations. You see, and they're all things that are to do with what does it mean to be the Messiah, what does it mean to be the anointed. But it's very interesting to see how the promise of this psalm, which is implicit and therefore must have been playing through in Jesus' mind as he walks away from coming up out of the water, seeing heavens open. So suddenly the inner life has led to a place of permanent access to revelation from heaven, and being covered by the wings of the dove as the Holy Spirit, and therefore knowing the truth of this kind of protective psalm. And so the devil comes in and says, so why don't you make the most of that then? You see, why don't we do that? And it's interesting because Jesus says you don't put the Lord your God to the test. But as with all of these, actually, all of the things in the wilderness, temptations in the wilderness, they do come to a point where actually in Jesus' ministry life he does have to lean on these things. He does have to prove this case. He does have to prove the promise. He's not trying it out in a trivial way. So the devil left him, and the angels came and ministered to him. That's the way Matthew kind of puts it. So the angels really are there, and once the devil is gone, we suddenly find the angels around him. And he was there in the wilderness 40 days, being tempted by Satan, and then he was with the wild animals, and the angels were serving him. So the angels are there in protection, but they're not there to kind of what's the word? I suppose be lent on presumptuously. And then we go a little bit further in Luke's Gospel, and we find, as Luke starts Jesus' ministry with his arrival in Nazareth, and as he preaches, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, and then he says that actually they're not going to see any special miracles just because he grew up there, and there are people from all over the place who are going to see them, and they get really offended, and they take him out to the cliff to throw him off. So they rose him up out of the city and led him to the brow of the hill that their city was built on, that they might throw him off the cliff, but he passed through their midst and went his way. So you kind of see actually the promise is being worked out, but not kind of in that presumptuous way. The angels are there ministering to him in the desert, and he gets into a situation very early on where they want to throw him off a cliff, not the pinnacle of the temple here. It's not about making a show, but actually when he needs it, he finds that by the Holy Spirit he's able to just pass through those people, and he's taken to a safe place. So the promise is being proved. And if we go on to the next verse, we actually kind of see something of spiritual victory implied in the psalm. Because you will tread on the roaring lion and the coiling snake. You'll trample on the prowling lion and the serpent underfoot. It's just that doubling up that Hebrew has, done it once. Roaring lion, coiling snake, prowling lion, serpent underfoot. Shakal is the root for the word for that first one, the roaring lion. It actually means to roar, so it's the roaring animal, really, right? But we know that's a lion, so we say roaring lion. And you'll notice pethen is where we get the word python from, which is that kind of coiling, twisting snake, which actually means to twist. It's the animal that twists. But I've kind of put underneath it two quotes from the New Testament that kind of show that actually these are descriptions of the devil. So we have, it's almost as if the psalm has anticipated one day this is going to be something that the devil tempts Jesus in, tests him in, because you will tread on the roaring lion, and be watchful for your adversary the devil, because he walks around like a roaring lion, says Peter. I suspect he picks up this language from being with Jesus all of this time, probably picked up that kind of terminology. The devil is a roaring lion. And in Revelation we read about the old serpent who's called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. So here he is trying to deceive Jesus with his temptations. But it's all wrapped up in Psalm 91. The very next verses after the challenge is, you will tread on the roaring lion and the coiling snake. This is, if you like, Jesus, well, not if you like, Jesus is the promised seed of Eve who will crush the serpent's head while it snaps at his heel, which is the truth. And here in a mini way we have this spiritual warfare going on. The lion is being rebuked and he is the adversary, and actually the snake's head is being trodden on in this kind of context, and it's all there in the psalm. So when the devil had completed his temptation, it says he departed from him till another time. So he is defeated, he has to go. And then it kind of gives a wonderful little kind of explanation as we go through the psalm. Because he, this is now Jesus, is speaking to the character who's rested, come into that place of the overshadowing Spirit has come down on. Because he set his love on me, therefore I will deliver him, and I'll set him on high. Because he's known my name. That knowing my name, the word Shem for name is sometimes used of the essence. He really knows me. Doesn't just know about me, he really knows me. And so he'll call on me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in distress, and I will free him and glorify him. As there's a kind of a wonderful promise for Jesus to walk in over the next few years, because there are so many times where we hear people picking up stones to stone him, that they want to kill him, that they are anti him. To actually know that security of that sense, not in a presumptuous way, but the kind of the promise that has been tied in right from the beginning of Jesus' ministry. And then the final verse, and I will satisfy him with long life, or with length of days, which kind of hints at or semi-promises, if you like, the resurrection. Because actually in that terrible place of the cross where Jesus cries out for him, looking for rescue, here is the answer: I will satisfy him with long life, and I will present him in my salvation, is the way I've put it there, which is an odd way of an odd thing. Most don't put the word in. Most just say I will show him, but that's actually not the right word. Or I will see. It will show myself in. It's to present. So I will present him. So this character that we've read about, I will present him in, and then my salvation. And I put the Hebrew text, which again is from the Western Leningrad Codex. You know what I'm saying, WLC. The little word Yeshua there in red, the tav and the yod at the end makes it my. So of my is actually literally what the two letters mean there. But the little beth at the beginning is in. So in Jesus of me. So I'm going to show this person. This person is going to be revealed, and actually as they're revealed, is kind of the way it puts it at the end. They're revealed as the person Jesus, who's my Jesus, who is me. It's the Jesus of me, my salvation. All those kind of ideas. Now, I put all those things together, and you can say, is that good exegesis? Some of it's good exegesis, but it is there. That's the thing. It's not that you have to read these things this way, but it is there, and this is part of the thing. And of reading with eyes of faith. To will I see Jesus? Is he being presented to me here? And I think he is. I had a thought then, and I've just lost it. Sometimes it happens to me. Oh yeah, that's right. Going back to where we started with it. But actually, the thing that I'm increasingly convinced of, but I don't see written up very many places, and that's why I'm able to do things like this, is this. The place in which things like the appearance of Jesus' name in the Hebrew actually help draw these things, and the events that happen in Jesus' life that are described or hinted at in the text. You see, the way I read the Bible, when I come across something that sounds a bit like me, my attention is drawn to it, and it forms me. And that's why I call these kind of formative prophecies. They are prophecies that are laid into Scripture, that actually things happen to Jesus, and it feels like, oh, that must bring it to attention. And I believe this psalm really is brought to Jesus' attention early on in his ministry, which is why he teaches people to abide in me, and I will abide in you, and rest in me. And in my Father's house there are many dwelling places, because this is where it all starts. And actually that does lead us into fruitfulness. I heard that one in John 15. If you abide in me, in that you bear much fruit, and so glorify my Father, which is very much like the idea of that first verse. So it seems that this whole psalm has got itself into Jesus, and you can see why, in terms of the wording and the events in his life and so on. So I've done a lot of talking now. Does anyone want to ask any questions or make any comments at this stage? Sarah, I'm thinking of you.
Are you? Well, you know me. I've always got things to say.
Yeah.
No. It's just made me think numerous things. The different names of God.
Yeah.
In sort of I've got them written in my Bible actually. The Most High, the Almighty, the Lord, and my God. Four different names for God there, and just the different. It's very interesting for me to think about the different emphasis that the different names convey.
Yeah.
And I think it's really easy. This is just in terms of my experience, but I think it's really easy in some ways to lean on kind of one or other. And I'll explain what I mean through an example of, and it's actually the example you've quoted it there in Genesis in Jacob's blessing to Joseph, where it talks about the blessing. It talks about the Almighty and the blessing of the breasts and of the womb.
Yeah.
And also just before that, it's got another name for God, the God of your father who helps you, and by the Almighty who blesses you. And I remember God spoke to me very clearly once about how I'm very good at asking for help, but I'm not very good at asking for blessing.
Right. Yeah.
And it really kind of took me by surprise.
I bet you're not the only person, Sarah.
It's the kind of masculine-feminine thing.
Yeah.
And perhaps it goes back psychologically to how you've related to your mother or your father. Anyway, this is just me, talking about my own subjective experience there. But sort of that ability to kind of lean on the help of God, but not really lean on his kind of blessing or even have the expectation of blessing, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, so what you've said there about going into that particular name is really interesting, because I really want God to bless me as well as to help me. You know what I mean? So maybe it's really something about. I mean, and I think
it's interesting because when I said we'd do Psalm 91, the only reason when I said originally we're going to do Psalm 91 is because I thought, well, it appears in Jesus' temptation, let's put it in. It's only when I started to kind of actually think, right, what am I going to say tonight? And I thought, well, I've often looked at the name Shaddai, and I just thought, I always take this approach, and it's kind of about balance, because Hebrew words sit in a space. Every language, a word sits in a space. And you can't actually just say, because this is kind of the equivalent in English, it's exactly the same space. And so you try and look at the space it fills. And when you do, what you find is that often the kind of the way that your English translation gives this isn't kind of satisfying enough, if I can put it that way. But at the same time, if you come up, and that's why I started right at the beginning saying, I'm not saying this is the best reader, but the reason I went for overwhelming support, it was the best I could do to try and capture all of this sense of space, but actually somehow the process of trying to think it through, I actually find a bit like what you're saying there, it actually inspires you to think about things in your own relationship with the Lord and your own expectations. So if you ever have the opportunity, thinking of everyone who's listening in, if you're doing Bible studies with others and so on, part of the thing here is that as we're exploring these things, is how is it, just really what Sarah was saying, how does it challenge me in thinking, do I know the Lord like that? Because actually that issue of the names that he reveals himself by, I think it really is a key thing. He is quite, he doesn't, it's not just kind of, I feel like being this today, it's like Prince changing his name every whatever. He's not doing that. He's revealing himself for a particular reason to you in a certain way. Anyway, yeah, it's good. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. That was great. That was just my top line. My top line is that one.
Yeah. Anyone else got any thoughts, or is anyone else still here?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah.
Hi there, Jason.
Yeah, verse 5 is really encouraging, isn't it? About how you shouldn't be afraid.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be afraid of the terror by night, or the arrow that flies by day.
Yeah.
Nor the contagion that spreads invisibly, nor the assault that lays waste in daylight. That's a really good verse, I think.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
1,000 may fall at your side, and 10,000 at your right hand, but not near you. That's brilliant, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know, and that's what I'm saying. That's why I think probably there's something of this, the kind of confidence this must have given Jesus.
Definitely, yeah.
And that's probably why the enemy was challenging it. You know, you can't take this literally. Go on, why don't you have a go? Put it literally. See how literal it really is. See if you can do this. You know,
It's great, it's great, yeah.
It is very encouraging. Yeah. So your face has suddenly appeared. I can now see you, Jason.
Oh yes, I just turned my camera on. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's smart like that. Are you there still, Barry?
Yeah, still here, Christian.
Yeah, there you go. It's like taking register. I'm checking who's still there.
It was just for me. It was just that whole verse 1 thing. You know, that sets the whole context for the rest of the promise, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, to find and stay in that secret place in my inner life.
Yeah.
You know, so close that whether it's day or night, I know. You know, and He knows me. That all the rest of it kind of follows, doesn't it? On that premise, that's where I live.
No, it's interesting because I actually found when I was doing the PowerPoint earlier today, and I actually found myself really moved by verse 1 as I was doing it, and it struck me just really that in many ways the whole psalm reduces to 3 points, but then you expand, which is verse 1, which is actually understanding how the inner life place puts us in that protective place, which is an emotional protection. It starts with, you know, but then we have that kind of verse which clearly roots it into Jesus's experience, and then at the end we have the verse which includes Jesus's name, and you think actually those 3 points is what the whole thing kind of hinges on, for me anyway. Good.
Yeah, it really highlighted it to me again.
Good.
You know, picking up Sarah's point, you know, what does this mean? How does it apply?
Yeah.
That kind of like stood out really. I think I got lost while I was thinking about that as you went through the rest of it. So I'm going to have to look at the recording.
That's a very polite way of you saying it, Barry. What do you mean? I stopped listening when you waffled. Is really what you mean.
Not at all.
Sorry, I haven't been able to get the PowerPoint. If I could get the PowerPoint, I'd be super grateful.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, I can't find a way of getting it.
I can't find a way either, actually. No.
Has anybody else got it?
No.
It requires a lot of meditation, I think, to go through the different slides.
So I think in theory it's supposed to be there even when I've hung up and we've gone. But if need be, Sarah, I'll send it to you.
Would you mind? Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Good.
So can I say one more thing?
Yeah, go on, Sarah.
Sorry, if anybody else wants to hang up. No, it's just the thing about the temptations. I'm very fascinated by the temptations. It was actually the first preach I ever gave when I was a Christian ever was on the temptations, and I think it's kind of one of those formative things. So I haven't come across before the prophet, priest, and king in relation to the. I don't know if it's an idea that's really out there, but I really appreciated that. That was really good to further think about the temptations along prophet, priest, and king. But I've really, I was just, what I was thinking there is you were talking about the presumption, because my conclusion, or one of my conclusions about that particular temptation, is that we can presume on God's grace, and we can presume that God is going to be with us, and we can presume on His protection, even though we haven't really inquired of the Lord what He really, really wants, you know. And I think that's something that is quite, in a way, quite dangerous. But also looking back at the Old Testament, kind of the context of the quote about testing God, and what the Israelites did to test God there in the wilderness. I've often thought, I wonder if self-pity really is the sort of other side of the same coin as presumption. Mm-hmm. That they were. It's like, if God, you really loved me, you wouldn't put me in this terrible position, kind of thing. And so so just what you said there about the temptations kind of made me think again about presumption and self-pity being terrible things or terrible traps that the enemy wants to lay for us, because we're not laying hold of who God really is and what God really wants, his true nature. And I've often wondered as well about the temptations, whether the devil doesn't necessarily have a bag of tricks. You know what I mean? He will always tempt us on these three however we interpret these three temptations. I'm sure there's an awful lot in all three of them, in terms of the different things the enemy can do. But I think it's very important to understand about the temptations in terms of spiritual life.
No, it's, actually that phrase there is a really good way of summing it up, actually, Sarah, because so we're saying actually the whole psalm starts with the issue of spiritual life, resting in the secret place, remaining in the secret place, and then it hits a verse which actually becomes a key struggle point, a key temptation point to kind of stay in that place.
Yes.
So good. Well, it's as ever, I find it a privilege and a pleasure to do these. So,
so do we.
Yeah, thank you very much
for turning up.
Thank you.
Yes.
And I'll hit stop recording now, because then those that want to do it with their home groups, we've only taken about 45 minutes, so so goodbye everyone.